Good afternoon. So, everyone, find your seat. I think we are a little bit behind the schedule, so better start now. Welcome to the third session of our public forum today. After we explore about Belt and Road in the morning and a lot of issues related to our region. Now, this session we're going to focus on the rise of the Lancang-Mekong cooperation framework as an emerging cooperation issue. And we have three speakers joining our session. One will focus on energy cooperation. Another one will focus on scientific cooperation, which is related to sustainable Lancang-Mekong issue. And the third one, interesting one, will be talking about implications for Thailand and ASEAN. So, shall we begin with the first one? We have speaker from Stimson's Policy Research Center, Courtney Wetterby. She is the research analyst on Southeast Asia program. Her research is focused on infrastructure development and climate change energy in this region, Southeast Asia, particularly in the food, water, and energy nexus to the Mekong River Basin. And also China investment in the region energy infrastructure. So, Courtney, welcome, and we'll give the first speech to you. Yes, please.
Thank you. I am glad to be having everyone here today, and I was also very pleased to see energy pop up a few times this morning in our earlier discussion. So I'm going to try and address a few of the questions that popped up there in my presentation where possible. So as Kamon said, I'm here to talk about regional energy cooperation. So I'm essentially just going to give an overview of what's happening with regional energy development, the needs that have been identified in the region, including the investment needs, some of the potential shifts that we can see for renewable energy and changes to the way that transmission is happening and how that could impact the investment needs. And then a quick overview of the institutions and how the LMC could fit into this in the energy sector. So just looking at the regional energy context, trends that characterize the region as a whole, rapid energy demand growth throughout the lower Mekong countries. This will vary somewhat from country to country, but Vietnam's last power development plan anticipates that they will need to triple the installed capacity to meet energy demands by 2030. Thailand is currently revising its power development plan, but it is expected, based on the last one, that there will need to be significant addition. The previous power development plan in 2015 indicated that almost a doubling capacity would be necessary. It's unclear whether or not this is true, given that energy demand in Thailand has stalled somewhat in recent years, but the new power development plan is expected to anticipate significant additions for reserve capacity and because of power planning momentum to add big projects. There's double-digit demand growth in Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos, all of which have a fairly low starting point for installed capacity and are facing significant urbanization. There's also significant differences in the level of electricity access and installed capacity. So as I mentioned, Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar are all coming from a fairly low starting point. Most of them have less than half the power usage per person compared to Vietnam, which is about half the power usage per person compared to Thailand. So there's significant scope for energy use to rise, given the shifts in lifestyles that are happening in the region. And there's also a significant need to build out the grid, particularly for Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar. None of these countries currently have a fully connected national grid. Most of them have sort of a spoken wheel around the urban demand areas. So in Cambodia, you've got a grid built out around Phnom Penh. You're still facing significant electricity access challenges. Only about 60% of the population has access to electricity, and a lot of that is not reliable. Myanmar is facing a very similar challenge. There are regular blackouts in the urban demand center areas because of the supply issues, and only about 1/3 of the population has access to reliable electricity. So there's a lot of investment needed not only in generation capacity, but also in transmission capacity. And then finally, the region is rich in resources, but there is a sort of mismatch between urban demand centers and resource locations. So for example, looking at Thailand, more than 40% of the total electricity consumed in Thailand is specifically in the Bangkok area, but a lot of power plant locations are, for good reason, located outside the city. For coal, of course, air pollution is an issue. Hydropower, solar radiation, and wind are often very locational. And so there's questions of where the best location for solar plants and for wind plants are, and for hydropower plants are, versus getting that energy to the demand centers in urban areas. So the identified needs, as I mentioned, power capacity expansion is significant. Grid build-out is significant. If you look at the chart here on the screen, it's a couple of years out of date. This comes from the GMS and looks at sort of the grid build-out in the region. And I think it's probably a little too small to see, but the red lines are sort of the high-capacity transmission lines. You'll see that there's essentially trunk line build-out throughout Vietnam. There's build-outs throughout Thailand, but the interconnections between countries in the region are often lower level. And if you look at sort of the grids in Laos and Cambodia, here you can see that they're very limited in capacity. So in order to build out both to build up the electricity system both within countries and regionally, there's going to be a lot of investment needed. And one thing that's not really shown on this chart here, but that is important, is sort of the regional mismatch within countries. So in Thailand, a lot of the debate surrounding energy has been surrounding the gap that's expected in the south. I'm sure many of you have been closely following sort of the protests against coal plants inside Thailand. You've seen similar protests in Vietnam in some places. And in both locations, a lot of these new plants that are facing controversy are in areas that are expected to have a gap in the south in Thailand and also in the Ho Chi Minh City area in Vietnam. And while there is national transmission structures set up in both countries, there's not sufficient transmission in place to ensure that if you have, for instance, additional build-out in the north of Vietnam, that you can get that electricity to the south. So looking through sort of the traditional power build-out lens of point-to-point transmission, there's going to need to be a lot of additional high-level transmission capacity added to the grid within each country as well as between countries. Finally, and one aspect that's not necessarily talked about as much when you're looking at investments in regional energy infrastructure is the need to support grid management capacity. There's significant capacity differences between countries, both on the planning side for looking at energy mix, what type of energy you want to have in your grid, as well as sort of the management of that grid. So smart grid and metering technology are key to a modern energy infrastructure, ensuring that supply and demand are matched, that they're efficient, and in order to take advantage of renewable energy, particularly distributed grid, solar rooftop production. If you don't have smart metering, that's very difficult to do. And then also just looking at integration of renewable energy. We're starting to see countries set higher goals for renewable energy integration in their national power development plans. These goals are still not as high as what many activists would like to, and outside analysts would like to see. ASEAN as a whole set a goal for just over 20%. Thailand, the most recent announcement coming out of the Ministry of Energy, was saying that the next PDP will likely set a 30% goal for solar and wind. There is certainly significant scope to expand those, but there are also practical realities that can be run into if you don't have power planners and grid utilities managers who know how to integrate and work with variable sources of renewable energy. It's often an overstated concern because it's a capacity issue and it's a management issue of how you prioritize different types of energy in the grid. But there is capacity building that needs to be done if countries in the Mekong region want to expand their renewable energy capacity. And then finally, there's a lot of discussion that still needs to happen on the trade agreement terms between countries. As we all know, energy trade came up a number of times in the discussions this morning, and it is a key portion of many countries' plans for their future energy supply. Laos, of course, as the battery of Southeast Asia, is dependent on export of electricity, and that means that it needs to have markets and agreements for power purchases from mainly Thailand right now, potentially Vietnam, potentially Cambodia, and in the long run, potentially Singapore. At the same time, Thailand has a percentage of imports of electricity imports, not just coal, oil, or gas imports, supporting the electricity supplying in their last power development plan. The rate of import, or the amount of imports in the next version of Thailand's power development plan is very uncertain. There's been a lot of argument made correctly that Thailand has overestimated its energy needs and may not need to buy hardly any power from Laos. But that's, of course, both an economic and political issue as well as a technical issue of grid management. So it's unclear what that rate is going to actually be in the next power development plan. And similarly, Vietnam, facing significant energy expansion and not having sufficient domestic resources, will need to import something, whether that's electricity from neighbors or LNG from abroad is a debate that's happening inside Vietnam right now, or whether they're going to replace that with potential significant integration of renewables. But imports and exports are going to play a role in the region, and there's not yet been true agreements on a multilateral trade basis hammered out. So there's capacity that needs to be built on that. Just looking specifically at monetary amounts to some of this, the International Energy Agency came out with their updated report in 2017, the Southeast Asia Energy Outlook, that estimated that for Southeast Asia as a whole, so this is including maritime Southeast Asia and Indonesia, which is a significant portion of this, but they estimated about 2.7 to 2.9 trillion US dollars of investment were needed for energy infrastructure. And only 570 billion, imagine saying only for an amount that large, but only 570 billion of that is for the installed capacity. So a lot of that is going to be for the transmission infrastructure, for energy efficiency investments, whether that's in building standards, car and vehicle emission standards, and electrical vehicles emissions, electrical vehicle standards, battery storage. A lot of other things are incorporated under this, but the important takeaway is just that the actual installed capacity investment here is fairly small as part of the portfolio, but it's still a very significant amount. And so when you look at the average spending per year in the region, it's only about $50 billion a year, which is still 40% of all foreign direct investment in ASEAN, but it's about 3% of regional GDP. So it's a significant amount of burden for countries here to bear. It's worth noting that very few countries spend 3% of their national GDP on infrastructure investments, and when they do, it's often split up among many different types of infrastructure, not just energy. So there's a real need, not only for the involvement from international financial institutions, but also for the private sector to really get engaged further in investing in energy in the region. And none of these numbers include the capacity building. So this here, the numbers here are essentially just for the physical infrastructure and then the energy efficiency standards. It's not looking at the investments in training, expertise, technical expertise to manage grids with renewable energy or other types of capacity building. So taking sort of a step back, those are figures that are from the most recent studies, and they often look at things from sort of a traditional power planning model, where you've got large power plants, you've got large-scale regional energy trade, and that model is not entirely going away, but it is being disrupted by the rise of new technologies, most notably the renewable energy shift that we've seen in recent years. So when you look at the power plants that I was referring to earlier that project significant capacity expansion for the region, many of them also have energy mixes that are very reliant on old technology. If you talk to energy planners, the reason for this was simple. They're familiar with old technology, so they know how to run hydropower, they know how to run coal. They've been taught for a long time and seen economic models work for a long time. They're relying on these old technologies. And if you ask them about renewables, they would almost to a person say, the idea of renewable energy is great, but it's too expensive. Or if it's not too expensive, as the price is dropping, we don't know how to manage it. There's significant shifts that have been happening in recent years, not in Southeast Asia per se, but around the globe. So the prices dropped rapidly. From 2009 to 2016, the price of solar on a global average dropped about 85%. For wind, the price of wind dropped about 65%. So, and a lot of that happened, you can sort of see up here, the top right picture is showing power purchase agreements. And this particular chart is power purchase agreements in the United States, but the drop here is reflected on the global scale. And you'll see that just within a few years, it went from something like $250 a megawatt hour to $50 or less a megawatt hour for solar. That means essentially when you look at the price of electricity, that's under 5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is very competitive in the Mekong region with coal, and it's increasingly competitive with hydropower as the technical difficulties of the new hydropower plants coming online. They're located further out, you need more transmission. Often they're not sort of easy, low-hanging fruit hydropower projects that first attracted investors. And most importantly, the cost of mitigation being built in raises the cost of hydropower significantly. So globally, renewables are becoming far more competitive. In Southeast Asia, this is starting to emerge. So there's sort of the question asked in the sessions this morning of, are energy planners in the region, particularly Laos, but throughout the region, starting to consider alternatives? And I think the fact is that they are. It's just been a slow process because the price drops that we see here often take time to trickle through the market. And often they're based not only on overcapacity of solar panel production from China, which has been a key driver in the drop of solar price, but also on the policies adopted by local governments. For instance, just policy clarity on laying out a framework for investing in solar energy, or zoning, other permissions issues. So the regulatory framework matters, and so does the financing framework. So getting loan terms that are competitive with loans that are offered for traditional energy resources. So there's a significant role from investors and from development partners in this process, or there can be a significant role in this process. The second sort of trend, in addition to the renewable energy, is sort of the rise of distributed grid structure. So the point was made earlier that Thailand is considering distributed grid models. I know that there was some news coming out of the Ministry of Energy, I think just 2 or 3 days ago, that says that they're looking to do a pilot project here in Thailand, essentially looking at the economics of buying and selling from distributed grid from people who want to put rooftop solar on their house and sell it into the grid. It's a positive sign. And that is a very disruptive change for traditional utility. So it's a challenge. And it's a challenge that is not only for developing countries, but also for developed countries. So there's a very productive conversation that can be had here, looking at global case studies of how this has been done successfully and where it has not been done successfully in order to identify ways that the Mekong countries can take advantage of this. And then finally, other energy market shift for the region that's really important to consider is the role of China. And so far today, we've mostly been talking about China within the context of investment through the AIIB, from the LMC, under the Belt and Road, and that is all certainly a key factor here. But just as important is the fact that China's Yunnan province is over capacity for hydropower right now. So as we all know, there have been many dams built out on the upper Mekong in China. In recent years, there actually just hasn't been enough investments in transmission infrastructure inside China to get that energy to markets on the coast. And political economy of how different provinces in China want to purchase power has actually led to an increasing amount of water that's sent through the spillways instead of through the powerhouses in China to produce power, because there just isn't a market for it. And this has been a rapid shift. In 2015, there were about 95 terawatt hours of excess hydropower that wasn't utilized inside China. In 2016, that rose threefold to 300 terawatt hours. Just to put that in context, within the recent years, Thailand's total national consumption was about 150 terawatt hours. So it could be said that Yunnan province wasted 2 Thailands of electricity, where they built the projects, it's already installed, the environmental and social damages as such as there have already been done, but the power is not going anywhere, it's not being put to use. So there is interest inside China now in investing in transmission infrastructure to bring this power to markets in Southeast Asia. There's a lot of question about how that's going to be done. Is it going to be invested in a way that's equitable? Is it going to be invested in a way that benefits the Chinese companies, disrupts the energy market in Southeast Asia, and essentially stops hydropower construction or renewable energy construction in Southeast Asia? There's a lot of questions about this, and there's not a plan yet in place, but this is a potential avenue of discussion under the LMC, particularly if the LMC is serious about taking advantage of the nexus, looking at issues in a cross-sector manner, and getting feedback from downstream countries about what they want. So just continuing the thought about the excess hydropower in Yunnan, going back to sort of the challenges with energy in the Mekong region, the current plans for hydropower include more than 100 dams in Laos and 40 in Cambodia. That's a significant amount of investment. Looking back to the significant investment that's needed for energy infrastructure more broadly, the hydropower investments in the Mekong region is certainly a portion of that. As we know, these are not cheap projects. When you look at, for instance, the Sayaburi project, the cost ran up higher than it was, significantly higher than it was initially. And one portion of that was the result of the consultation done through the MRC, where the investors spent an additional $400 to $500 million in response to criticisms of fisheries. It's not yet clear the extent to which those changes that they made to the dam design will work, but $400 to $500 million on a $3 billion or so project is not an insignificant amount. There's the opportunity to take advantage of system-scale planning, the rise of renewable energy, and essentially reconsideration of the energy mix to not only identify potentially more sustainable energy outcome for the Mekong region as a whole, but also drop the investment cost that's needed. There's an interesting study that was done by the Energy Resources Group at UC Berkeley that looked at the costs, the investment costs of different energy portfolios for Laos specifically, keeping in mind the reality of what's available on the ground, keeping in mind the energy export goals of the Lao government. And when they ran their models, they actually found that you could have a least cost scenario that's $2.5 billion less than sort of the business scenario. So the least cost scenario, which essentially said put conservative estimates of energy prices into the model and see what the model would pick based on what's available inside Laos and on a cost model. And you'll see that their model came up with an energy portfolio that starts adding solar and wind in the early 2020s, rather than continuing with the sort of business as usual hydropower model. And the up of it was that it costs less to do that more diverse energy portfolio than it would to pursue sort of the traditional business as usual hydropower and coal focused portfolio. So it's not to say that either of these models here or either of these scenarios here is the ideal outcome. Obviously there's a lot more than just energy cost that's considered when you're looking at energy mix build out. But it shows that there are options and that many of these options would be increasingly economically feasible based on the price drops that we've seen in recent years, as well as the rising recognition of the costs associated with these projects. So I'm just going to briefly run through the institutional context because a lot of these groups were already discussed to some extent earlier today, and there's so many that listing them all would take a long time. But when you're looking at sort of the energy and power sector, some of the key institutions for the region are the GMS, the Asian Development-Based GMS program, particularly, and John Jordan mentioned this earlier this morning, the Regional Power Trade Coordination Committee, which has met more than 24 times. They have working groups that look at sort of grid codes and regulatory challenges to energy trade in the region. It's been a long-going conversation in support of increasing efficiency on a regional basis and helping countries meet their development needs by meeting energy demand. And it has made significant progress, but it still hasn't led to a fully functioning regional energy grid. As we talked about earlier, the investment just hasn't come through, the environment hasn't been right, and it also has run into sort of the same political challenges that energy trade in any region of the world runs into, which gets into the discussions of energy security and energy interdependence concerns. The World Bank has also been very active on energy trade, particularly inside Laos, looking at the Battery Southeast Asia program. They have a regional power trade project in Laos that ended, I believe, in 2015, but I think there's continued to be engagement, capacity building, as well as investment. Briefly, I'll just touch on some of the other regional initiatives. We all know that the U.S. Lower Mekong Initiative has had energy as one of its pillars since its founding, so there's been a lot of engagement and capacity building done with that. Japan obviously has a lot of investments in the region, and I know that JICA is deeply involved in supporting national energy plans for Myanmar and for Cambodia. And that just sort of brings us to the question of the Lancang-Mekong Cooperation Mechanism. As we all know, if you have a chance to read through sort of the 5-year plan that came out of the LMC summit earlier this year, power grid planning and connectivity, energy trade were all included as an area that the LMC seeks to engage in. We haven't yet seen any clarity on what exactly the LMC's portfolio in the energy sector would look like, Obviously, we've seen a lot of work on the water sector. It's not yet clear to what extent any energy engagement under the LMC would be through a separate energy center that has yet to be set up, or if it's going to be integrated into the existing environment and water centers. But there's obviously opportunity for LMC to coordinate any power energy engagements they do through the LMC with existing interests in investing in these sectors through the Belt and Road Initiative and through the AIIB. So it just sort of goes back to the question of, it's an area that has a lot of institutions in it already. What is China able to bring to the table? I think there's a lot of discussion and interest in bringing the hydropower and onto the table. The big question is that going to be done in a way that supports a more sustainable long-term energy framework for the region, perhaps helps lower Mekong countries build out a more renewable-friendly portfolio that's modern, and it's grid development and supports discussion of trade-offs on how to avoid some of the more damaging and controversial projects, be they coal or hydropower. Or is it going to be done in a way that China's investment in other sectors has sometimes come across as sort of heavy-handed and exporting overcapacity, which again, sometimes that's positive in the solar sector, that's helps the globe transition to a more renewable-friendly portfolio. But it's just very unclear at this point what the LMC will do with energy. So I'm not going to talk any more about it and just sort of throw the question out to you in the audience to hear what other people think the LMC can be doing and is poised to do.
Thank you, Courtney. That's interesting, and I think after listening to Courtney, you might have already have many questions, but this is not for the time for questions. So we will collect all questions after the three presentations. And our next speaker will talk about opportunity for sustainable Lancang-Mekong scientific cooperation. Welcome, Dr. Chayanis Grita Suthachiwa.
Thank you.
Dr. Chayanis is from Asia Center, Deputy Director, Stockholm Environment Institute. She is working for Mekong country, in the Mekong country for over 20 years, including at Marcy, and specialized in the field of hydrology, integrated water resources management, climate change adaptations, and water resource modeling. That's very kind of various expertise. So how about the opportunity for sustainable in the controversial topic today?
Thank you very much for Khun Kamon and also for Carl for inviting me to join this forum. Just to share a little bit, so in the past, my background is really on hydrology and also water resources engineer, and I work for Mekong River Commission for some time. But more lately, I'm working more as a program manager for Sustainable Mekong Research Network. And the one that I'm speaking today, I just like to talk on behalf of our network. And you already heard some of the speakers, John Doe, for example, has mentioned about other track and other research network that actually have been working on water and other sectors related to water in the Mekong, and Summernet is one of them. So what I like to talk today is really try to kind of talk about how we could look forward by having emerging like network opportunities and also many initiatives happening in the region at the moment. How can we actually learn from disasters and tragedy that we have faced in July 2018? We heard this morning Khun Supalak mentioned about damage in Laos, and that's really sad event, and more than 6,000 people displaced and more than 30 people died. And Tonya asked about how we could actually prevent or how we manage the situation if this kind of flood or water released from the dam rampage actually reach the mining sites. So this is something that many questions raised. And what happened last week? We found big news and even more serious with Myanmar damage that flooded 85 villages and 60,000 people really affected. And when we talk about who's actually responsibilities and who actually should take part of these issues, so even with the government, they admitted that it's very hard for them to tell and know when this kind of incident would happen one day before or even 1 hour before. Because of the different organizations, they have their own interests, and also they believe that what are the most important things on linking to infrastructures or linking to any development. For example, irrigation department government officers mentioned that they have to restore water, keep water for the next seasons. So that's really not anything wrong about that. But who actually could tell that in the next years and also in next few days that would happen like this if they don't really release much water. So that's really sad. So that means that's actually a lot of knowledge gap that we need to, apart from raising many questions and concerns, have to tell and talk ourselves how we could address these issues, how we could use actually the knowledge and filling in the gap, and how could we use the knowledge that to be developed or prepared or actually disseminated, really influencing in the decision-making process on the policy or even the development. Both incidents are not related to China at all, but they are actually challenges that we are now facing, and we cannot deny on this. How can actually all together in the Mekong, or we say Lancang-Mekong communities, from the government, from the governmental organization, media, and scientific communities could actually work together at the end to really contribute to societies in reducing the risk of such events that may be happening in the future. And because of we are working, SCIs and also others, 70 member organization in a Summernet, and working on the research to influence and also inform the policy and decision-making body. And we are often asked ourselves how we could do this. I would like to offer my personal perspective. How can we actually have enabling factors to have long-term and sustainable scientific cooperation? People ask me, what do you mean sustainable scientific cooperation? Do you want to have many publications on a high-impact journal? That's not really what we aim for. So of course, creating and defining new knowledge is fundamental to prove that the knowledge is actually credible and reliable for the society to make use of it. But the most important thing is how we can actually build the knowledge from existing knowledge and the effort and the trust among different and concerned parties. And the most important thing is how do those knowledge could actually be in real use for the society. And I would say we need 5 factors to enable that. So we talk about existing mechanism. We need to learn from ongoing activity in partnership. And we need to make sure that the demand actually driving the research agenda. So many of us here try to talk, and several of us here try to talk on behalf of communities. And do we really have opportunity to talk with them what they really want to know, and do we actually have a chance to talk with the policymaker what they really want to understand more for the knowledge to produce and make decisions on development and policy. So, and it's very important not only to know what they want to, but actually how we can make sure that the knowledge that will be produced actually owned and feel trusted to be used in the future by those who are the decision makers, not only in the government, but also for communities. They have to take decisions on their daily life. And I would say that only possible if we have long-term commitment from all parties. Let us review what we have at the moment in the current day. Many people already talked this morning about different mechanisms. I will not repeat. I just want to say that we have intergovernmental organizations, we have intergovernmental initiative, and we have many networks and also initiatives. We have media network, we have research network, we have practitioner network, many others. What are really important is whether their own initiative and the network, they're doing their own work, whether they consult with each other, or whether they actually work jointly, or actually inform the agenda to each other to really further build on the knowledge that they will do. So because I'm working for the Summernet, I like to spend just one slide talking the Summernet network. John did not mention about Summernet, so I take these opportunities. So Summernet is a long-term research network. We were founded since 2005 by 14 founding members. And I would say it's the privilege to have Mekong River Commission as one of founding members of the Summernet as well. So we still exist as Empower really influential a lot in the past and really produced a lot of work. But they also declared that they retired. But the Summernet, the network with 70 member organizations involving more than 200 researchers still has aspirations to continue the work, to do research, to influence the policy and contribute to the society. And our network not only involved with the academic and universities, but also the government and civil society. So what we would like to kind of work in the next year is really to reduce water insecurity for all. So that I feel that is some things that only possible if we could have opportunities to work closely with ongoing collaboration with the intergovernmental framework, for example, LMC and others. So Anurag mentioned already about ongoing cooperations between MRCs and LMC. And how about the others network and others initiatives? When it comes to the Summernet, we actually try to engage with ongoing discussions and contributed to more as a neutral party on whether we often ask whether we are pro-development or we anti hydropower. We actually only make the recommendation based on the evidence and knowledge produced. And we actually have facilitated consultation, including the Park Bank hydropower dam in 2017, and also contributed in the independent review of MRC housing studies in 2018. So this is just example how research community try to involve in the formal or official process that is going on at the moment. And how about the others on the other side? So MRC experts also contributed a lot to the Summernet work, to the research work and assessment work. So in the past we have many experts, including Anurag, also Joy, some of the policy dialogue on the forum. They're trying to actually help shaping the research agenda. So this is very important. Someone asked whether the upstream country could be affected by the stream country, and I would say the research community needs actually some advice from the communities, from policymakers, to make sure that what we will do in coming 5 years or 10 years will actually serve the real demand. And I think the MRC actually help a lot to that for the work that we do under the Summernet. When we look at the 5 years action plan of Lancang-Mekong corporations, I think John already mentioned in summary what actually LMC is trying to focus in coming 5 years. And what I feel quite positive to see that for water sectors, it has really a big highlight that the technical cooperation that will be open for the work and the research, joint research and analysis among different countries, and even talk about implementation of the pilot projects and priority projects in coming 5 years. But what are the issues here? How we could actually encourage and making sure and help the design of the future LMC project, joint project, that would actually address not only the biophysical side of this or engineering side of this, but also the issues related to environment and also society. So, and we could already see really big improvement in terms of cooperation in practice. I would like to refer to 2016 when China released water from the dam to alleviate water scarcities in the lower Mekong countries. So in the past, when I worked for the Mekong River Commissions more than 10 years, so we have been talking a lot about cooperations, about data sharing and others. But I see more recently China is more open, and we could see this as one a concrete opportunity that really some action has been taken. It is actually helped a lot to the downstream countries. And we could do even more and more if we try to contribute to whatever the future cooperation and joint projects that be funded under LMC special funds, I believe. So when it comes to demand-driven research agenda, how we could do this, how we could know actually what are the research topics, what are the things we should reply to the society, the policymakers, and the communities. So recently we have done the interview and also online surveys for all 200 members in the networks, and we got about 95% respondents say that these are three actually most important research themes that should be addressed in order to help and for the benefit for the poor, marginalized, and also many people who are really vulnerable to water security and water insecurity issues. First is related to, of course, about drought, water scarcities, but it's not only just how much water, but also how to access water, rights and allocations in the time in need, whose access, and also and how to really manage in such situation. It's similar to the second theme, which is really flood disasters. It's not only the natural flood, it could be flood for the dam break and others. So how this issue is governed. And of course, the technical side of things, early warning is important, but also on how we manage and how we interact with all actors concerned is important. Transboundary interactions with water systems. Courtney already mentioned about energy sectors, and this is very important that only when we manage and also look at the water sectors, we need to think about the other sectors that interlink, including energy and others like agriculture and other sectors. So 95% confirm that these are key research agendas and should be put in top in the 5 years, next 5 years. When we review a 5 years action plan of LMCs, I feel like quite positive to see that they put the issue linking to flood and drought and also adding on water quality of the top agenda. So this is very important, and I already heard Mr. Lee Hong talk in the morning that actually LMC projects will not only focus on the technical side of things, but also linking to environmental issues and also social issues as well. So we need to, if possible, to support whatever the design or other things in the future. Why? Because it always takes time for us to see the change, and please don't give up. And I would say is that what we actually have proved this because of in the recent years, SOMANET has been working and keep monitoring for the long term of change. So recently we have analyzed more than 100 stories of change to the speakers and the storytellers, not only from the researchers, but also policymakers and also the communities. In the first few years, we asked what are your feelings in terms of most significant change through engaging with the research that you engaged since the beginning. So most of them, majority of them talk about the new knowledge. Some of them talk about changing in the way they're thinking and attitude. But when we proceed thus more and more, taking longer time, more stories that actually reflected the change in their attitude and their practice and their behaviors. So we would not like to change anyone's practice if it's already very good and very well. But by working together, we better know the friends, we better know the other countries. And one of the work that we do with the SOMANET is we make sure that research project actually jointly done by different countries. From Vietnam, Thailand, they know more about perspective of Cambodia and Laos and Myanmar, for example. So by having this kind of joint cooperation and long-term commitment working together, we actually could see more changes in the way of our partner thinking and even the way they formulate the policy and improvement of the policy in practice. It's not only one time, but we also aim at changing this as become more the way they're thinking embedded and their belief in mind. That's why we monitor the change not only one time at the policy as such, but we try to monitor the change in practice more than one time, 2 times, 3 times. So by doing this, it will be more sustained. And I would say this is why there's a lot of opportunity for us to think about sustainable scientific corporations that we need to interact with different concerned agencies. And it takes longer time and need commitment. And this is just the last slide. And I would say SMG is still open and very much open always to cooperate with governmental and non-governmental organizations to really strengthen the knowledge-based policy process. And please join on our journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing. That's very interesting. Well, you gonna leave another question after the presentation? Yeah. And our third speaker is Kun Apichai Sunjinda. He is currently the independent analyst or development specialist. I'm not sure which one you would prefer to use. Yes. Kun Apichai will spend, compare to Kun Chian, who spent like 20 years in the Mekong, working on in the Mekong countries. Kun Apichai might be a lot more, because he spent most of half of his profession in working in ASEAN issue as working with the ASEAN Secretariat and ASEAN Foundation, and currently will keep close monitoring on ASEAN issue and sure his time. So what he's going to speak today is the Lancang-Mekong Cooperation Framework, the implications for Thailand and ASEAN for sure. So it's yours. Your turn, Apichai, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mon, and thank you, Carl, CSCS, for the invitation. Okay, since we are short of time, let me just quickly run through. I think this has been talked about already earlier, but just give you a pictorial, the linking of the red line is the belt, and then the road actually is the yellow, the blue line running below that. Now, in terms of recent geopolitical trends, obviously, the rise of China is a determining factor, one very, very main factor, and then of course the Belt and Road is sort of their signature or flagship project. But then there are other things like South China Sea, East China Sea, maritime issue, and then the Mekong sub-region is sort of part and parcel of that overall scheme of things. If you want to look at it that way, which presents us both opportunity challenges and as well as both upside and downside considerations, right? And of course, how does that fit in with the overall ASEAN and GMS integration is another issue. And then I guess people have already talked about the potential counterweights to this. Of course, these are the usual suspects, but on the other side. Interestingly, my focus, as you soon know, if you're not already, is that focusing a little bit from the ASEAN sort of perspective. So what I can say is that these are all dialogue partners of ASEAN, along with China. Okay? And then there's of course also talk about some form of variation of the Indo-Pacific strategy, and then of course the Quad has been mentioned, although others are also being solicited and so forth. Okay? From an ASEAN perspective, there are also some newcomers, like Norway, Switzerland, Turkey, Pakistan. These are sectoral dialogue. Germany is becoming another development partner of ASEAN. So these are also interesting developments in terms of how ASEAN is attracting attention from the lesser powers or that sort. Okay. And then finally the integration, connectivity, whether it's GMS, whether it's ASEAN-wide, linking up with BRI, LMC, or Indo-Pacific, as someone suggested, that is again another issue. Okay. So what are some of the emerging development trends in the Mekong? I think I don't need to go one by one. I think some of this is already known. But just listing out of integration, connectivity, corridors, energy, telecom, trade, goods, services, people, you name it, hydropower and infrastructure, and then of course the downside risk on socio-economic, environmental especially, and then of course climate variability and natural and man-made risk. Okay, So how do you manage that in a very cooperative way? I guess that is a challenge, and to minimize conflicts and disputes. Okay. Okay, just to emphasize that there's a lot of infrastructure links and things and plans and master plans and what have you. Again, I think some of this is familiar to most of you. Okay. Again, the Belt and Road, and then of course, interestingly, the new banks, the BRICS Bank, which is one of the new banks. Also, China is actually what? Brazil, Russia, India, China, bank, right? And then, and also South Africa. So that's the 5. And then, of course, the AIIB, which you mentioned, Mekong sub-regional scheme. Many of these are all the different sort of regional or sub-regional frameworks. And then, of course, finally, you have all the economic trade agreements that are now floating around. Okay. Okay, coming to Lancang-Mekong Corporation. I take the view like of Anula, or not so much with Anula, but more with the traditional name LMC. So it's a new kid on the block, so to speak, the latest, but it's coming up very strong, very fast, and of course comes with a lot of money. Then, of course, the positive side is that it includes all the 6 riparians, okay? Whereas many of the other, one or two missing. Okay? But then, of course, the potential fear is that, okay, China will dominate, if not dictate altogether, all right? And then I guess we can also ask the question, what is the value added of LMC when you have so many other frameworks, okay? And then finally, on the positive side, we want to think about it is, okay, like AIIB, now it has, international shareholders on its board. So it's not just, although it's led by China, but it's, it's international in its scope and its composition. So if LMC can also follow suit, I don't know, that's a big question, but if it can and it can add value, then of course I think it meets certain international non-standards, then why not? Okay. I wrote a piece just about 2 months ago on this for the Habibie Center in Indonesia, and this is taken from that article. Okay, what I've done is basically map out all the major intergovernmental cooperation frameworks that are in the Mekong sub-region at the moment. Yeah, the last count here is 13. Okay, so compared to, let's say, in the year 2000, there's only maybe less than half of this. Okay, and a lot of it has come up in the last 10 years, basically. And what I've, as I said, my focus on ASEAN. So what I've done is, these are all configuration of subsets of ASEAN. It could be ASEAN 3 members of ASEAN, ASEAN 5 members, ASEAN 4 members, or ASEAN 10, okay? But I think what I just want you to focus on is the ASEAN 5, meaning Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam, or the CLMBT, or ATNES, okay, depending on which grouping you want to be associated with, okay? And this is one of my other, long-term colleagues, Dr. Jamsak, who, we all worked together in ASEAN Secretariat before. Of course, he's now with the Institute of South Asian Studies. And this is what he noted in one of his articles just about 2 years ago. Basically saying, with so many, frameworks and programs, is there any, coherence, any direction, or each is sort of doing their own little thing? So, are we being served? In other words, the Mekong countries are being served, especially the people, are being by all these development activities, and I guess he basically saying that if the 5 member states, meaning the CLMBT, as I said, can come together, which by the way these are all ASEAN members, then that could play a much more important role. In other words, ASEAN should step in and step up its role in this regard to give some sort of an overall coordination. And if you compare to an orchestra, it's like a conductor, okay, to make sure it's effective and timely delivery of outcomes and outputs. Okay? Okay, what are some of the key issues? I think also I can go quickly. I think it's all known more or less to most, if not all of you. I think there are many, all right? And the point is, how do you, to borrow the MRC motto of meeting the needs and keeping the balance, is how do you walk, keeping the balance and make sure that things are on track and going in the right direction. And I guess this is also taken from the MRC's latest development strategy. basically how to maintain that balance. Okay. Okay, main challenges, again, there are many. I think many of them have been touched upon already. Again, rise of China, but then you also have energy and water and different other sort of competing needs and interests. So you change one, you change the other, and then they also interact in many, many different ways. Okay, I think that's basically the point of this. You notice that the last point on this is I wrote something, and I've actually recently again reiterated this possibility. I don't have time now, but if you like, I can talk more later. This is the tsunami in the Mekong. And then other main challenges, I think it just calls for that we need to, basically what this all boils down to is that we need to come and sit down in a multi-stakeholder forum to thrash these things out over time, over space, over sectors. Okay? But opportunities we also have. For example, I understand that under the US LMI, they are now sort of reconfiguring their priorities. They used to have about 6 or so priorities, right? Education, health, blah, 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 and now they put us into, I think, 2 or 3. Right? I think the latest evolution is that they are moving in that direction. So we can say there's a little bit of a sort of a progress there. Of course, there's also increasing realization that transboundary issues matter and that they need to be addressed accordingly. US LMI, of course, has friends of the LMI, which includes not just themselves, but a whole host of others. But what is ostensibly missing, of course, is not China, which is, of course, not in that. And of course, the Chinese LMC, of course, is also willing to work with ASEAN, with MRC, GMS, and so forth. Of course, the Chinese, as I mentioned already, AIB also has, essentially some potential good points there that they are open for external partners and even stakeholders. Now, interestingly, Japan and China have held 5 meetings over the past decade on the Mekong. Maybe not too many people know about it. Although lately I heard that because of the bilateral relations are not going too well, so maybe it's a little bit diluted, but they have managed, okay? And then 2018 was, I think somebody already mentioned, it's actually a golden year for Mekong issues. We have one after the other in the first half of this year, okay? And interestingly, ASEAN leaders have also expressed way back about 5 years ago about the need to address water issues in the Mekong, including assessing impacts of economic development on environment and people's livelihood. So there you have it. Okay, it's not as if the ASEAN leaders have not taken note of this. And then there's ASEAN and China, which is a dialogue point of ASEAN. They also have joint plans of action, 5-year plans, and they have also included Mekong in their plans. Okay, at least for the last 2-3 plans. And then, okay, you can say, all right, in the case of these new dams in the lower Mekong, Saibai and Don Sahong. Saibai is actually a Thai investment, Don Sahong is a Malaysian one. So if you put it in the ASEAN context, it's actually an AEC-driven kind of cross-border investment. But interestingly, ASEAN also has these different blueprints up to 2025, and this one actually is the greenest that I've seen, at least on paper. Okay, but it's a good start because you compare the previous plan, nothing. No mention at all on any green issues. At least here it's there. But it's on energy, transport, tourism, you name it, agriculture is there. All right. Okay, on Lancang-Mekong, we have the potential because they're talking also on water. But of course, it could be better or for worse, depending on how the things will work out. I think there are still some pending court cases in Thailand on this Saibai Dam, right? Still waiting for some final appeal and a few other cases, so keeping fingers crossed there. Somebody has already mentioned about Vietnam's ratification of the International Water Clause Convention in 2014, causing it to come into force, which is a more rule-based regimen. Okay, maybe I think Vietnam is sending a signal, saying, look, this is important to us and we hope the others will follow. Now, as somebody has also mentioned, Thailand will be chairing ASEAN next year. I think, although the official team is not announced yet, but I've heard from insiders that sustainable development, people-centric, leaving no one behind are key priorities. Okay, so there's some hopeful signs, some recommendations. In my view, this is my view, is that maybe we should get, out of all the 13 or a dozen frameworks, maybe let's collapse it. Well, start with the few that are perhaps a little bit more key yeah, or more instrumental. So people have mentioned about ACMES, although okay, we can say whether that's effective or not, but still it's the ASEAN 5 in the mainland, right? And then you have ASEAN China, you have ADB, you have LMC and MRC. I think these are the ones that are, if we can get that to come together and really thrash things out, maybe that's a good start, okay? And then of course, the next important thing is to have a more common information database that we can share, and that we can have a good inventory so that we know who is doing what, when, where, and how, all right? And then finally, of course, open collaboration, participation, accountability, transparency, all right? Now, back to Thailand now. Although this is a bit long, maybe I can just quickly run through it. I mean, Thailand, as you know, is geographically quite central in the Mekong. So in that sense, it's ideally suited as a hub or as a gateway or whatever you want to call it. But then, because of that, it's sandwiched between other countries mostly. Yeah. So it presents both opportunities and threats, in that regard. So you have to strike the right balance, especially when you're competing with other major powers in the region, whether it's Indo-Pacific or whether it's BRI. All right. You can be caught between a hard or rock place if you don't play your cards right. Now, the two dams at Saraburi and Sepien and Senam Noi, these are actually basically, in my view, Thai investments. Going there, you want to buy it eventually back. So in that sense, there's also, lately because of the Sepien case, people are saying, is this like a sub-regional hegemon trying to exploit, what it cannot do at home and then export it abroad, so that your profits are still gained and yet your risks are externalized. It's a smart business way, right? Let's put it that way. but is that acceptable or not? Okay. Or even internally, on the energy side, I think Coordinator mentioned, but I said, look, I think there's a lot of wastage of energy in the Thai society. So actually,